Well, good afternoon, everybody. Actually, no. Not so very good. Because I myself have been the complete opposite of living under a rock. And everybody out there who tries to make it seem like that they've been living under a rock clearly have to know by this point that it's December 30th, 2021 AD. And while we are in fact a little more than 24 hours away from having a whole new year ahead of us with a whole new land of opportunities awaiting us at every single turn that's possible, I guess there's one thing to know that, well, see, I gotta put this on because the cold front really is settling in and we are expected to get a rather large, I guess, snowstorm beyond most things considered. But you know what though? I'm willing to give in my all because today is gonna be a pretty big thing for every one of you to know. Because this certainly is not the first time that I've really had to unleash fury upon the world. But as hard as it is for it to sink in, the facts have just got to be mentioned. I can no longer just hold in the truth because it's painfully obvious that I've had to express it at every single opportunity that I've ever had in my whole life. This whole entire year. I mean, maybe I'm going a little light on it. I'm sorry, but 2021 is the worst year ever in my That's probably just what is a starting point for what I have to say about this. At this point in time, it's probably very clear that 2021 is not only the worst year ever in history, it's one of those things that really put 2020 to shame. Like, I cannot believe this. Like how? How does this stuff happen? Like, come on. Of all the times that we've had in history that happen to be bad, this has to be the one that goes all the way down rock bottom. Albeit a very smelly rock. One of those rocks that really makes you wonder, who even decided to call this a good year? They're clearly looking from behind closed doors, windows, skylights, traps, everything. It's a whole blank room with nothing in it. Like solitary confinement. That's literally where most people these days are looking at it from within. I myself, though, have gone all out. Knowing just how insanely bad this whole thing has been. And man, like, where do I even begin? So, you know what though? It's probably time that I should get to the point right here. So, this is in fact going to be a collection of various different topics that I've managed to take in all together. I managed to make a ginormous list of these different things and pretty much take it in to my own advantage. This is without a doubt the absolute worst year in history. And at this point, the only thing I would care about it is that if it just took itself out and buried itself in its own grave, took its very real everything with it. There cannot be a joke about this. Not even in the slightest. There is no reason why a bad year like this has to exist. And I mean absolutely bad. Worse than 2017. Worse than 2015. Worse than 2013. 2008, 2001, and everything else. 2019 was a bad year too. With all the ever-growing wildfires and pedophiles and overrated garbage that has ever circulated the planet. As we've taken trips around the sun, left and right, on an annual basis, it's important for all of us to consider that we have to comprehend these things. But this is one of those times where we cannot take it anymore. We'd rather be dead than ever have to live through something like this. Ever. In our whole lives. I never would have imagined that we would have something this big, something this bad, and something this, just unbelievable. Man. I feel like I'm gonna stress myself out here. I'm not even 23 years old. But yet I am more than old enough to understand how bad these times have gotten. And I'm serious. This one virus, with a ton of variants following behind it. This insurrection, with all sorts of terrorists in America following it. And then everything else. This is my collection of testimonies provided by anyone that I could ever potentially find. This is the top 60. Yeah, I originally wanted to go with 50, but I felt like that was a little too modest here. So, you know what? This is, well, I don't know if it's going to be a top countdown related thing. It's more like just a highlight sort of thing out here. Highlighting all the things about 2021 that had ever been so bad that they would have made this year completely uninhabitable to live in. If anyone were to go back in time and choose a period to live in for a vacation or whatnot. Here are 60 reasons why this is the worst year ever in history, period. And you're probably wondering how I got a hold of all that? Then, well, here we are. I got this. And for the record, credible sources all aside, pretty much, this is basically just my hot take on everything, pretty much. If you ever want to try and counterattack me with all sorts of things out there that make the year good, then be sure to leave a comment down below to let me know exactly what you thought made the year good. I myself probably would have had a few things out there relating to the fact that maybe there might have been some potential about this year, but because of how awful it turned out to be, with all the bad events that have completely outclassed anything that has ever been good, I pretty much have no choice but to say that the many highlights that I've had throughout this whole entire year of 2021, a time where I've happened to had a higher success in my career, a higher amount of inventory liquidation take place. Not to mention I was making some really good money that I managed to invest in a brand new camera, which, as you probably already know, is my Canon PowerShot Mark III. So that thing was probably the biggest expense that I've ever had to pay off. A whopping $787. And not to mention a boatload of other things. So we also can't forget about how, unlike 2020, there actually were only 2 trips. If you were to count my move to Beaverton, Oregon as the way of a trip, then, well, that's pretty much up to you. It was supposed to be a move, not a trip by any means. It was supposed to be me living out my life the way nature intended. Then, of course, there was that time where I was out in Carolina, so that's 2 trips instead of 3 like I had last year. We also can't forget about the movies. many of which were very bad by all means. And if I had to pick one from all this year 2021, it would be The Suicide Squad. Yep. If you remember when I talked about it on Films I Should Have Talked About years ago, one of a handful of new projects that I first unveiled here in 2021, alongside others like Survival of No Limits, as well as a few other things, then well, you probably would know that I actually talked about The Suicide Squad 2021 as a bonus episode to that series. And I actually gave it a score of 9.5, 0.1 lower than Toy Story. So, when you have a film that came out in the worst year ever somehow getting to that point, then you know that something's up. So, at this point, it's fair to say that I've lost my sanity. So without further ado, now that I got some good highlights out of the way, it's time to talk about every single one of the bad highlights that I can put together into one single video. And I'm sure hoping that any of you guys who are currently watching this whole entire thing from start to finish will get to know about how long this whole thing's gonna be. This is a very, very big testimony to prove a huge point that is always going to be true until the end of time itself. I don't know what the future will hold, but if there's ever going to be a year that's even worse than 2021, we will surely find out. Until then, though, here we go. My collection of testimonies. I got myself a notepad on my phone, of which that I'm going to pull up right here. And we're going to get started with the obvious. Number 1, the insurrection of Washington, D.C., January 6th, 2021. It's not only one of the biggest ever events that had occurred, it was also one of the worst to ever occur in American history. A large grouping of conservatives following the election of President Joseph R. Biden. After the failed election of Trump, of which that would have happened if us voters would not have stepped in and done something right to change this country for good, well, you wouldn't think that people would actually be dumb enough or stupid to try and attack the country for no good reason. But instead, that's exactly what happened. January 6, 2021 proved to be just that. An event where the entire Capitol building is overcome by an extreme number of conservative terrorists and rioters. As unbelievable as a thing that was, for that to happen in only the first week alone of 2021, with all those people claiming that 2021 is going to be better than 2020, when all it was just a bunch of effing lies, then you know that something's bad. I mean, it was only the first week out of 52. First week! How can you call it a good year when an insurrection happens? One that we never would have thought would ever take place. And you know what? It doesn't even matter anymore, because it might as well just be the one event that America should never forget. Forget 9/11 just once. Because we have more recent history that shows that our own people have betrayed us. They tried to completely destroy our democracy. Just like that. And if you thought that that was bad, then well, just wait until you see what else is going to happen. So let's move on to number 2. Hashtag Superstraight. This was in fact a bit of a movement to try and gain a lot of transphobic and homophobic relations into the public eye in order to try and boost high ratings, and also to try and see if the LGBTs are willing to allow these kind of people to roam free without any consequence. Well, mind you that is a complete falsification. Because first of all, Superstraight is not a thing. It never has been a thing, and it never will be a thing. Think about it. If someone were to invent Superstraight and it somehow would become a legal sexuality, then at this point, anything could come around. Super gay, super demi, super trans, super anything. I mean, doesn't that sound awful enough? Like, really? And who would have even thought that somehow it could in fact become a trendy topic on Twitter under the hashtag itself? And that's why it's called hashtag Superstray, because it was a huge, huge problem back then. The way I see it, though, many people may not be talking about it here, acting like it's going to be a complete and total fad. But the way I see it, do not let anything this horrendous become a fad. Let it be known throughout the public eye. Let it become mainstream news for the rest of our lives. Never let it go. Never let these problems fade away from existence. Become obscurities that are on the internet. That's not how this works. So in any case, if you thought that the insurrection and Superstray were already some of the worst things to ever happen in your whole lives, then think about what happens when I talk about the third highlight that I have to talk about that makes this year so bad it would make you want to end your life very quickly. Stop Asian hate. Because in the South, back in February 2021, a shooting of an Asian-owned spa had actually caused a lot of outrage on social media. This is what eventually led to a rise up of another movement similar to Black Lives Matter, known as Stop Asian Hate. But yet, the whole point of me mentioning this is that while it is important for all of us to consider that we should never allow Asian hate to take place in the same way that we should not allow African American hate or POC hate, person of color by the way, the whole thing about me mentioning Stop Asian Hate here as a bad highlight is the fact that there's so much controversy out there with people trying to point out that Stop Asian Hate is literally not like Black Lives Matter. But yet, it is completely false. Both of these movements can be supported at the same time. And when you got all sorts of people out there trying to falsify things out there, like how BLM members are attacking SAH members, then you know that that is even worse than everything else I've already mentioned. But yet, this is only the third thing. I completely support both movements. BLM has the right to exist, or better yet, a need to be around here, especially if we're not going to have anything shaping up. Any kind of act that's not being cleaned up, we are going to continue protesting, not rioting like millions of people keep claiming about us. Because that's a total lie, a total sucker front, and an absolute facade that never should be pointed out. And I'm also with Stop Asian Hate, so if you like it or not, then well, just take it or leave it. And you know what? I'm just getting started here. Because let's move on to number 4 of this whole entire thing. Groomers. If you're not aware, groomers or grooming is the new hip way of saying pedophile or pedophilia. A person who commits pedophilia is one who is above the age of 18, acting very suggestive or straight up NSFW towards a minor, someone who is below the age of 18. And in any sense, this would lead to this person becoming what is known globally as a pedophile. But yet in recent years, pedophile and pedophilia have not necessarily been of sound because someone came up with the term groomer and grooming. And apparently this is what led to a lot of people taking this topic very seriously. I myself am willing to forget about the fact that groomers and grooming, they both relate to animals being under the care of certain people who are professionals and cleaning animals and styling animals to their liking. But the thing is, let's not call them groomers anymore. Let's call them dog, cat caretakers, animal caretakers. At this point, it doesn't really matter to me very much because groomers at this point means pedophile. It's the same exact thing. Why else do people keep talking about this? I guess I'll never know. But that's not really the point here. The point of me bringing this up is just the fact that here in the year 2021, there's been a lot of those people. So many of those freaking people. Like, really? How does this even happen? Like, how does this many people come up and straight up cause this sort of outrage like that? Of course, that's the whole reason why we're getting uproars every single week. Because the way I see it, this whole year alone, we've had all sorts of people out there turned into pedophiles. From the first week of 2021 with Call Me Carson, the extreme controversies that stemmed from that whole thing, all the way to this point in time where all sorts of other celebrities, be it regular or internet related, like Kevin Spacey, Cosmopolitan, and not to mention Drake Bell from Drake and Josh. So, we also can't forget about the trial of R. Kelly, whom was also known to be a straight up pedophile way back in the day. And with the boatloads of other people whom have straight up turned into pedophiles, it's just ridiculous at this point. Absolutely ridiculous. Like, it's so bad at this point that I'm like impressed. I'm not even playing sarcastic with you. I'm being serious right now. I am literally like, I'm touched by all of this. Like, absolutely touched. The fact that so many people here in 2021, in contrast to how many of them there were in the past several years, it's just crazy. Like, how do this many people become literal predators? Why would they do this to us? Are they trying to get more views? Are they trying to literally turn their fan base into a complete and total washout? Are they trying to get the best of their own people? Are they trying to make their fans some of the most well-known? Are they trying to do anything at all that's good? But yet they do everything that's bad. So I guess none of that even matters. So, you know what? Like, I'm beyond depressed at this point. So many bad events have already taken place here. But yet, guess what? We have a whopping 56 to go. And like I said, I originally wanted to have 50, but because of how many things have unfolded in recent years, especially with this whole entire thing being a complete, total, smelly meteorite that just impacted our planet, that's why I'm going to have 60 in total. So why don't we go ahead and move on to some of the smaller parts that made 2021 so bad. With number 5, the Clapper Clouds / Fire Floods. Mid to late August of 2021 was a huge period where tons of storms and floods have come by, especially here in Wisconsin. But I myself have had some pretty unbelievable experiences out there with weather like this, because when I'm talking about Clapper Clouds and Fire Floods, these are basically just what I'm referring to in terms of, well, the kind of bad weather that we've been getting in recent years due to impending climate change and all that. The environment is such a precious gem that needs to be protected at all costs, but yet nobody even cares about this stuff. So, I don't know what else there is to say about that, but anyways, Clapper Clouds and Fire Floods. I'm specifically talking about ginormous storm patterns that release impossibly bad amounts of rain that it causes flash floods immediately. Because at one point in August 12th, 2021, there were some pretty horrible storms that had taken place. But then within the next week, as these storms would continue to roll in, there would be the higher end likelihoods of Clapper Clouds, which is what I refer to large amounts of storm clouds that happen to provide concussive thunderclaps that are loud enough to practically shatter your eardrums in an instant. And I myself, I felt like I was literally going to have a heart attack from a few of these things. Like, as soon as I would hear these extremely loud sounds due to me having a lot more sensitive hearing, I would, in fact, jump in the air, like upright, really hard, that my heart would feel like it would explode. So, that's pretty much the Clapper Clouds part. But what about the Fire Floods, you're probably wondering? Well, it turns out that, well, like I've said, there would be a lot of flash floods that would happen because of these continuous storm patterns and because of a lot of other horrific weather changes that have taken place throughout August of 2021. But one flash flood in particular felt like it was like lava almost, possibly due to how hot it was outside already. But at one point in time, we actually ended up getting a flood that had affected nearly 20% of different parts of Menominee Falls, Wisconsin. And I know this because I've actually been to some places throughout that time. And I've noticed that there were tons of parts on the roads as well as some parts that were off the roads. The Menominee Falls River itself was even affected by these extreme rainfalls that have caused higher tides to rise up, and the water itself from the river would eventually leach out onto the streets themselves, causing a lot of chaos. But the thing is, when I call them fire floods, I'm referring to the fact that one in particular, I've actually had to go up and get a closer look at it because it was affecting a large portion of the town itself. And when I touched it, it literally felt like it was burning my skin. I'm serious. Like, if any of you were out here in Menominee Falls at that time and you would have actually had to take a dip into that water, not in a good way, that is, then you probably would have felt like it was scalding or burning, like badly. I specifically call them fire floods because of this. The fact that it can burn you upon contact like that, it pretty much spells a lot of disaster. But combined with the clapper clouds, it not only made August of 2021 quite a time to be in, but also the fact that you could do a lot more with less. It's pretty intriguing by all means, but yet, let's just say here, it only gets worse from here. These little events technically have a lot of issues. Because here we go with another thing that has happened in my life. Number 6, the time where I actually lost 2 jobs at once. As you probably have known throughout the past few years, I've actually worked with the Marcus Theaters Corporation between February 2019 up until January 2021. December 2020 was when I was sent an email that would give me some somewhat devastating news that I would be permanently laid off due to extreme complications following the initial run of the pandemic. And because at the time, near the end of 2020, the pandemic was nearing its 3rd wave, and it was climbing up fast in terms of daily death tolls. And the thing is, though, January 2021 was, at the time, the highest count of deaths that happened on a daily basis. You could basically look at it by searching for the death toll itself. It'll basically show you a bit of a line graph with some highlighting on it that would indicate how many deaths had taken place on a daily basis from these viruses. But anyways, I actually lost 2 jobs in January 2021, especially within the first 4 weeks alone. And it wasn't just the Marcus Theaters Corporation, but it was also from Kohl's. I worked there as well, just to at least take up the time that would have taken place if I were to continue my work with the Marcus Theaters Corporation. But because that was a seasonal only employment, I ended up getting laid off from them temporarily. Believe it or not, despite being laid off from both of these companies, I actually did not give up any kind of hope. I was literally one of only a few people who could actually pull themselves back together and get to know the fact that a lot of this stuff could indeed be prevented, or probably prevented from getting any worse. But the whole point here is that I lost 2 jobs all at once. Marcus Theaters and Kohl's are no longer a part of my employment life. I even went as far as to try and reapply back to Kohl's for a 2nd season worth of work, but yet that's never actually come around because of a lot of complications there. So it's fair to say that I will not be able to continue my work with Kohl's. As for Marcus Theaters, well, number 6, the lack of job interest. 2021, as you know, was a huge period in time where unemployment became so common, and there's a lot more that I will get to in a little moment, but At the time, 2021 was probably one of the worst ever periods in time to have extreme levels of economic depression. Probably since what we have discovered in 2008 with the recession, and way further back with the original Great Depression in the 20s and 30s. But when you really think about what's been happening these days, 2021 was not only the worst period to ever find such bad unemployment, but it would also be a time for me especially to not necessarily have much of a chance to be able to get into most jobs. I've actually put in a really good resume back then, and a really good work form, as well as plenty of other unique documentations that would allow anybody, be it part-time or full-time work, to come to me. Any kind of employer would be able to see this stuff, and as a result, they would be able to notify me by email or on the phone. Sometimes anywhere else even. But at this point in time, it's fair for me to say that I haven't really had that many good job opportunities. There were times where we've actually gone as far as to go and apply to some places, but yet most of the time we never quite heard much of a response, or it's just the fact that there's a huge lack of employment that comes around, which is certainly pretty bad by all means. As a result, I'm not necessarily willing to go on much further to try and do that kind of employment, especially when there are other opportunities. Lots of options are in my hands, and I can always do things this way even. If I have to rely on YouTube's monetization service on a 24/7 basis, I would be more than comfortable doing that, because this way I would be able to just simply do my work by just showing my voice to the world, my face to the world, my clothes to the world, everything to the world. So, when you put it that way, it's a pretty simple process. Just record yourself, edit a video, upload it to the internet. That's simple. As opposed to having to go through an application, then a phone call, then an interview with a full 3-piece suit, and then of course when you do get the job, sometimes there could be a lot of complications following that procedure. But in the end, it's either one thing or the other thing. That's sort of the ratio here that we're having to deal with, and it's also how we're having to learn to live with ourselves now, because the last 20 to 30 years have been a whole different story. Well, anyways, let's go ahead and move on to number 7, which was probably one of the most devastating news that I might have ever heard in my life. The departure of French duet Daft Punk. Guy Manuel de Homem Christo and Thomas Bangalter are in fact French musicians who have banded together with helmets and sparkly attire, calling themselves Daft Punk. Between 1993 all the way up until the point where they had departed from their careers in March 2021, they have not only become one of the best known influences in modern musical tastes, but also they've become a really nice big material in most pop culture. They've released several different albums, from Homework in 1997, Discovery in 2001, and Human After All in 2005, all the way to 2010 with the official Tron Legacy score that they composed themselves, and also became a cameo appearance within the film entirely. And then finally, their latest official outing within a full album, Random Access Memories in 2013. It is in fact one of the best albums I've ever sought my eyes on. It contains so many great pieces in there, all sorts of songs, ranging from Instant Crush, Doing It Right, and Fragments of Time, all the way to their forever popular, super big one single, Get Lucky. So at this point in time, it's not really arguable that Daft Punk is probably one of the biggest musical influences ever to occur in American and even worldwide history. And it's also a reason why they went ahead and won the 2013 Grammy Award. So, when you have a group like that may seem a bit anonymous in the public eye, whenever they get a Grammy Award, I myself I'm just more than excited about what would be there to come after all that. But it turns out in 2021, they announced their departure. And they've since been separated, probably never to make music again. As devastating as that sounds, it probably would be for the best. For them to spend a little bit more time in reality. So they can keep their finances in check, and so they can keep on living. Just as nature intended. So, it's a really, really sad farewell, but it's probably only appropriate that that farewell takes place before anything even worse between them takes place. But that brings me on to number 8, company closures, because as I said before, this was a pretty big time for unemployment, one of the worst we've ever had to come across. In 2008 with the recession, which eventually led to a lot of stock market slumps and huge amounts of home foreclosures. And we also cannot forget about how bad it was in the 1920s and 1930s with the Great Depression. But 2021, on the other hand, proved to be a whole different story. In 2019, there was in fact one of the biggest number of business closures that had ever taken place. 2020, there also happened to be business closures, but many of that happened to be delayed because of the initial run of the pandemic. Throughout the first 3 waves, especially, which ran throughout all of 2020, it does seem that there has in fact been a lot of problems that would have happened from that. But in actuality, though, here in 2021, we actually have a huge record breaker when it comes to how many businesses have closed down. And as a matter of fact, a lot of companies are actually failing so hard that we could see a lot of them going defunct anytime now. And I mean it. There's companies of all sorts that I've known for a long time. Target, Kohl's, Crystal, Five Guys, Papa John's Pizza, and who could ever forget? Ruby Tuesday and Applebee's. A lot of food-esque businesses, restaurants of all sorts, fast food industries, and tons of others. They happen to be doing so badly, in fact, that who even knows how they're going to survive? If they can, in fact, survive, that is. But you know what? I don't even want to argue at this point with anyone out there who's going to think that 2020 is actually the reason why these businesses are closing down, because these businesses have been highlighted as being ones that are going to fail so badly that they might as well go defunct within the next decade or so. But if there's one type of closure that I feel like devastates me the most, it would be the fact that this month alone gave us some horrible news. Earlier this year in 2021, it would be announced that by the end of the year, Shrek 4D in Universal Studios Orlando would be closing down permanently. After 18.5 consecutive operating years, it is in fact going to be gone, alongside a lot of other attractions that Universal Studios Orlando pretty much has scrapped over the past 20 to 30 years. So, I mean, you could pretty much just take it in as quite a big message for me to talk about here on YouTube. But in any case, let's go ahead and move on to the next subject in mind. This one in particular is the Gaza Strip airstrikes, because this year has had a pretty big medley of different horrifying events, most of which were almost at an apocalyptic level. And the Gaza Strip airstrikes, which happened in the Middle East earlier this summer, had certainly become one of those many things out there. But of course, it gets even worse. Number 8 is the KRI Nangala submarine, of which that it had apparently sunk in April 2021. It would eventually be found, but the wreckage was pretty devastating. And then we got number 11, which relates to the decline of Girl Scout cookies. Probably some of the best known cookies I've ever had. And with all the flavors in mind that I've been a big fan of, Thin Mints, Caramel Delights, peanut butter sandwiches, and then the many others out there. It only is a pretty bad thing that has happened to them. I mean, who even knows if they're going to be around for next year, but anyways, now we got ourselves number 12. Ireland's official removal from the UEFA. I tell you, there's been a lot of problems that happened there as well. Number 12 is certainly a pretty good spot to be around, but we still got a whopping 48 to go. Number 13, the Northern Tornado. If you remember from an Instagram post I made in July 2021, it was a time where I had apparently been rudely awakened at 2 a.m. in the morning because a huge tornado had spawned in Wisconsin and was roaring throughout the whole state. We had to go underground immediately, and we had to keep a good tab on what the weather was like. There are a couple of Instagram posts that you can still see to this day that truly dedicate this whole entire thing. But then, of course, when it comes to tornadoes, we got number 14, the Kentucky tornado. One of the worst that we've ever seen in American history. And being that Kentucky doesn't really sit near Tornado Alley, who would have known that kind of likelihood would take place? Because it sits a bit closer to the East Coast, it would have been a bit more likely that it would have suffered minimum damage at least from a hurricane and not from a tornado like what we apparently saw. But you know what though, being that it was a huge disaster at the time, it was one of the deadliest in America. I mean, for a way to happen December 2021, I'd say having a huge tornado rip across a few states in America is a fine way to end all this. Not even kidding around. And then we got number 15, Ps4 Error Logs, because if you remember from the huge problematic series of corruption related issues that I was having with my other PlayStation 4, as I was able to get another PlayStation 4 from an uncle of mine. This time around though, it's really unfortunate, but it turns out that this one has a lot of problems in it as well. I keep getting error messages from it left and right. As a matter of fact, I'm currently revisiting Ark Survival Evolved and even playing through Call of Duty Vanguard. But believe it or not, there's been several times this past week where I've actually gotten some error messages. Like, really? How on earth does that even happen? Like, why? So, you cannot argue with that kind of stuff. So, anyways, we're going to move on to number 16. This is one of the biggest factors about how bad this year really was. Celebrity deaths. And I know 2020 also had its share of celebrity deaths, but this one is considerably worse. Beginning with a lot of people out there that I've known for a long time, like author Eric Carle. Yeah. Eric Carle had finally, well, died off. Then, of course, we can't forget about Ed Asner, the lead actor from Up. It also turns out that Asner has also had a pretty big film career back in the day. But then, of course, the most recent case, John Madden. Yeah, an 85-year-old had apparently died recently. John Madden. Of all people out there, John freaking Madden. Like, who's even next? I mean, is next year gonna be a big testimony to all this too? I don't even know. But, again, it's just unbelievable. At least compared to how many deaths happened in 2020 with people like Kobe Bryant and Chadwick Boseman. I mean, a good amount of people had died last year. But this year is considerably worse from all of these other events. Like, how on earth does that kind of ratio come up at us so quickly? So yeah, anyways. Now we're going to move on to 17, Wildfire Rage. Yeah. I don't know what else there is to pretty much say about that. It's a pretty straightforward thing. Wildfires have been considerably bad throughout the past few years. This year, however, has been the unbelievably bad #1 spot for all that. Because if you remember, there are a lot of pictures that people have uploaded to the internet of the wildfires being so bad that the sky literally turned red. Red hot, flaming red. Like, if you think that that's devastating enough, then just know the fact that the wildfires that have been happening lately are even worse now than they were back then. So, I don't know about you, but I would not want to pretty much call it in at any point in time. Because now let's move on to the February powerhouse, as I call it. A huge blizzard had rolled in February 2021, completely shattering the crap out of some substations and power stations. And it turns out that there have been so many outages reported at the time that it was ridiculous. I mean, how in the world does something that bad happen? I don't even know. But anyways, the extreme power outages caused by a huge snowstorm in February certainly were pretty awful. But you know what? That's like nothing compared to what I'm about to tell you right here. Number 19, we have the Bulgarian Bus Crash. Enough said about that one. It's pretty much just what it is. A bus crash in Bulgaria. It killed a lot of people at the time and injured way more than that. But then we got number 20, cryptocurrency. And the many controversies that stemmed out from all that. And yeah, I'll just leave that as it is. Just leave this here. Cryptocurrency is a horrible idea, but it's gotten so big in 2021 that it's mind-boggling how that can even be allowed to happen now. Number 21 is the San Jose Rail Yard Shootout, which was, in fact, at the time, the worst shootout that had occurred in the San Jose, California area ever in history. So, a lot of people have died there, and many more were injured. Number 22 is the Asphalt Princess hijacking. A ginormous oil tanker called the Asphalt Princess had been hijacked. And that's a lot of fuel that it was carrying around at the time. Number 23, the Russian poultry outbreak. If you're familiar with what I've talked about based on bird flu, then you probably would know by this point that bird flu was also a huge deal in Russia because a large poultry farm had apparently harbored this particular virus and it had broken out very badly. That bird flu in Russia was huge, especially in the particular area where it had started from. Then we're going to move on to 24, which is Tokyo Olympics related concerns, because after all, the Tokyo Olympics of 2020, like many events from 2020, had to be postponed due to the first 2 to 3 waves of the pandemic itself. And although none of which are indeed as high as what we've gotten today from the remainder of wave 3, and then we have wave 4 and wave 5, all of this though, compared to the first 2.5 waves, were horrible. I'll get to those later though, I will tell you that for sure. So, anyways, it's important to know by this point that, well, with the Tokyo Olympics having to be postponed to 2021, there had also been a lot of problems there too, especially when it had finally gotten itself an opportunity to be showcased to the world, because after all, the pandemic continued on way after what people would think that it would be over with. As soon as the vaccine started rolling out, people assumed that all of this would be over. But then, of course, there was the abundance of other problems. So, at this point in time, it's fair for me to say that none of this should come off as a surprise. But when you have something like this, then, well, it's pretty obvious that you should not allow these kind of events to take place at all, despite how many times you want to have these kind of events shown. Because it's certainly not at all safe. Having a virus that has killed millions of people so far is definitely not an excuse to have events like this after so long. I mean, that's just the thing about it. Ending a pandemic takes time to perfect. And the thing about it is that, well, I don't know about you, but there's probably a lot of other things I could probably mention on this list that would be related to the pandemic, but we're going to move on to number 25, which talks specifically about the 7.6 magnitude earthquake in Haiti, which was huge. And the fact that the earthquake happened over there means that some of the shockwaves could have gone as far as probably around Canada. But they would have been very, very, very little compared to how it was down there. Number 26 is the European jet stream. Extreme amounts of flooding had occurred in Europe, much like when I've talked about the fire floods earlier. But this case is way more devastating. Extreme amounts of floods have killed nearly 230 people in a few different countries. And the weather changes and patterns, much like with the Clapper clouds and fire floods related thing that also happened here in summer 2021, this particular event was certainly way more devastating in comparison. But the thing is, floods are certainly something that need to be contained at all times. That's why we have dams. The Hoover Dam and many others that exist throughout the world. But again, as devastating as it may be, it's a preventable sort of thing. It's just kind of stupid that it wasn't. Number 27, dog deaths. Much like celebrity deaths, I honestly feel that dog deaths and all that are pretty awful to see. If you remember from April 2020, where Samson the pug had finally been done in thanks to a long-running range of different symptoms like diabetes, old age, numbness, blindness, deafness, weakness, and plenty of other horrible things. Samson the pug had finally caught a break from all of this horrifying nightmares by just simply dying down. But it's important to know that this year, in comparison, a lot of dogs that I've gotten to know about very well, including Jake the Boston Terrier and Peace the Cherry Retriever, one of the only red-colored retriever dogs that I've ever gotten to know about. I've since come into contact with a twin of Peace called Kane. But even though we don't see each other very often, every time I go to my grandparents' house, they have a neighbor who does in fact have both of these dogs. And even though Peace is now gone, and Jake is now gone, Kane is going to be around to pretty much be entertaining every now and then. And then of course, with everybody else, it's pretty much just that. They met their end through different ways. And it's devastating pretty much. But the reality of death is going to be around probably till all of us come to an end. And time itself will eventually die off just like the rest of us. Number 28, lack of social media credit. The gain to a community, as I've mentioned many times over throughout the past 3 or 4 years, had been one of many different traits that I have in fact been able to utilize as a way to have extreme popularity on social media. But it's important to note that this whole entire year is a period where I've actually been struggling sometimes over and over again. And of course, if you remember in late 2019, where I've actually had to remove one of the 2 Twitter accounts that I had, I mean, like, that's just the thing about it. I mean, that's one of several things that make 2019 a bad year. So, I'm more than happy about how 2020 managed to turn out compared to that. But here in 2021, I'd say things have pretty much been lacking. And it's not just on Twitter either. I mean, I've been having some in or out situations with subscriber counts on YouTube. And of course, Instagram. A lot of people have been actually giving in some likes and some views to my content on there, but Instagram is not necessarily the better trade in comparison. It's just one of a few different accounts that I just so happen to still have every now and then, just to interact with and upload something on certain occasions at least. But let's just go ahead and steer from that kind of stuff, because number 29 is pandemic continuation, obviously. Number 30, Gina Carano incident. In February 2021, Gina Carano had procured a tweet comparing the Conservative Party to that of the Nazi Army, led by Adolf Hitler during World War II. As a result, Disney had in fact stepped in and then had Gina Carano removed from employment with the Walt Disney Company and as one of the main cast members from The Mandalorian, which has currently been with 2 seasons, in 2019 and 2020. Here in 2021, though, we've actually gotten the news that there will actually be a series dedicated to Boba Fett, especially with the epic resurgence of that character after what should have been the end of the character Boba Fett in Star Wars Episode 6, Return of the Jedi. But the thing about it, though, is that the extreme outrage of political parties relating to this incident is probably one of the main reasons why this year is just very bad, by all means. A lot of people that I've known have actually completely cut ties with Disney, ending their subscriptions towards Disney Plus, burning their Disney-related merchandise, and even doing a whole lot of other things that would totally offend Disney by any means. So, of course, I myself am not going to let go of this incident. I'm not going to forget any of this kind of stuff that's ever happened with anything that's this bad. But anyways, let's move on to number 31, where Nerf Secret Reveal Bolts of Intrigue ends up becoming average by any means. I intended for it to not only be my first ever adaptation project, of which that it was based off of the long-running Nerf Secret Revealed web series that I've had on YouTube between 2013 and 2020. January 1st, 2021 was the time where I had in fact uploaded the full-length feature film dedicated to this long-running franchise. But the thing is that with all the hard work that I put together, and with the tens of thousands of dollars that I've sunken into this project altogether, across 4 cars, dozens of Nerf blasters, a ton of sets of clothes and costuming, and props and whatnot, not to mention the different kind of other fees that I would have to pay off, it's fair to say that even with around $69,500 on the line, Nerf Secret Reveal Bolts of Intrigue, I don't really know if it's supposed to be a success or a failure, but being that it was the first ever film adaptation related project that I've done in terms of my filmmaking career since '06, I'd probably say it probably could have been better by all means. But now we're going to move on to number 32, which is Inhospitality turns out to be a failure. Yeah. Later in 2021 would be a time where I would attempt to create a film project based off of one particular idea that has been mentioned to me about how if I don't prepare right for the weather, dress appropriately for the cold, then if my car were to break down in the middle of nowhere, then I would probably be in very, very big trouble out there. Because nature doesn't necessarily seem to care about what happens to me. So, I ended up trying to create an entire film project dedicated to this potential idea. But yet, it turns out to be a failure. For a few reasons. One, there's been a lot of delays that had taken place in terms of the film production entirely. The second thing would be the fact that I haven't really had a lot of contact with a lot of people who have given me a lot of support during my production in Bolts of Intrigue. And the third and final thing would be the fact that we've had a lot of different problems taking place. And as a result, it's fair for me to say that that film project is indeed a failure. Enough said. Number 33, Hurricane Ida. Obvious, the way I see it. Number 34, the Uber/Lyft problem. In February 2021, much like with a handful of other things I've talked about, a video was uploaded with an anti-masker completely removing their mask and proceeding to cough on an Uber driver before attacking the driver. Like, wow! Wow! Congratulations, person! You straight up tried to infect a driver with a virus and then attack the driver with your bare hands. Like, why? Oh my gosh. I've never seen something this stupid. Stupid, stupid, stupid. Ever in my life. Like, and I kind of felt like, a lot of other things from this year have already been bad enough. Like, I am not joking around here. At all. Like, why? At least the good news from that, though, is that that person has since been banned from Uber. And despite how Lyft was never involved with this incident, they also proceeded to ban this individual. But who even knows if this person is actually that capable of doing something that unbelievably bad? Then who even knows what we'll see in the future? This one person could be more problematic than we ever would have thought. So, end of story, guys. Number 35, anti-maskers and anti-vaxxers. As you already know, this has been a huge point in time to where safety matters to us all. And 2020 did at least give us a huge amount of inspiration that if we don't do our part, then the world will not be safe from any of this. The virus and all of its variants, as we all know it, is everywhere. It's throughout the whole world. It's why it's called a pandemic and not an epidemic. You could basically look up the definitions for both of those terms, but the main point of me talking about the anti-maskers and anti-vaxxers is simply because of how bad it's basically been. This whole entire year, it was bad enough that where people have continuously rioted against the well, I mean, it was bad enough when all sorts of people were just trying to oppose the new rules that were based on wearing masks and getting vaccinations. Because this whole year has been a big testimony to how awful this opposition has been. And with all the people out there in what we know as the minority who refuse to wear masks, get vaccinated, like we all should be, they're basically doing a lot of things wrong. They're spreading viruses to people that we know kill them from the inside out. They're spreading a lot of lies to others and a lot of conspiracies that happen to do with the truth about the pandemic. They are spreading a lot of falsifications, anarchy, and potential warfare that we would be forced to deal with. And at this point in time, it really is just that clear. It's a clear cut that it's just that bad. And I don't even know what else to say about that point. So we're just going to go ahead and move on to some other things out there that have been associated with my life. Like number 36, car troubles. In another case for February 2021, the Toyota Corolla liftback pretty much becomes history. So I guess there's not much I could probably say about that. It's yet another photo of mine I got on Instagram if you want to go check that thing out. But aside from the Toyota Corolla becoming a piece of junk now, we've had some troubles going along with some of our other cars. As you probably already know, my primary car that I currently drive is a 2001 Jeep Grand Cherokee Laredo. And I have had some difficulties with it, but I will in fact greatly explain it a bit more after I talk about a couple other things I'd like to get out of the way first. Like number 37, Cyclone Saroha. Pretty much needs to be there, because why not? But here we go with number 38, car repairs. 2021 is like many other years I've had in recent history. It's been a time to where I have actually gone on ahead and had a lot of good experiences as a mechanic. But the thing is about this being a bad thing for 2021 is just the fact that there's been so many problems going on with my primary car, the 2001 Grand Cherokee Laredo 4x4, that it's gotten kind of ridiculous even. And I don't necessarily know what else to say about that part, because let's just move on a little bit, shall we? Number 39, the local Super Crazy Spice Extravaganza. This was a 15-part milestone challenge that I did in August 2021 as a way to honor Choo Choo the Yorkie's 5th birthday, which happened on August 14th, 2021. Choo Choo was born in August 14th of 2016, 5 years prior. And so, what I went on ahead and did was that I made 15 milestone challenges dedicated to Choo Choo's birthday. And so, when I went on ahead and did that, I went ahead and grabbed on 15 different spicy products out there. Mostly snackable things out there. But then of course, as the time would go on, things would get even more heated as I would then increase the spice amounts here and there. But let's just say that within the last 3 or 4 days that had passed on throughout the whole challenge series, I tell ya, I'm going to be saving this exact topic for last, but let's just say that this one thing that happened close to the end of that whole challenge was so terrible that I literally could have died from it. And, I mean, death from spice is an extremely, extremely rare case. But yet, it has happened. And I would have been one of those unfortunate victims. Because this is exactly what I had decided to do. To pretty much allow my fan base to flourish and to give everybody a good chance to laugh. To also give a lot of entertainment to people. But now let's move on to number 40, car shopping. Yet another thing that has to do with cars. Because after all, especially here in December 2021, we've gone on ahead and taken on a lot of trips throughout the whole state, and even outside of Wisconsin, as a way to go look for any other cars that we could probably get in our own lot. Because the lot that we currently got has 3 cars, one of which is newer, and the other 2 are much older, and have had a lot of repair work done over the years. And the thing about it is that I have managed to get a good amount of life savings put together to build up a budget that would be sustainable enough to eventually buy myself a used car. A used car that could have a lot of benefits to it that would pretty much exceed any and all expectations, but would more importantly be reliable enough than what the Grand Cherokee Laredo could have possibly had. Being that it's a lot older and all that, it's pretty much going to be nearing its end. But we've been doing a lot of car shopping here and there. A lot of choices had been made, and a lot of options had to be put together with tons of research in mind. And of course, the usage of some apps, from car gurus to, well, tons of others out there. Let's move on to number 41, the lack of content. This in particular is a pretty obvious one because, as you probably already know by this point in time, there have not necessarily been a lot of different things out there, of which I will go ahead and explain right away. Number 42 and number 43 will in fact relate to this especially. But number 42 is in fact unofficial podiatry. This has been a long-running series which is not necessarily an official thing out there, but much like some other videos that I've done every now and then, unofficial podiatry is one of those where I actually talk a bit about the studies of the human foot to my knowledge. And then of course with the usage of other people's knowledge out there, I actually go ahead and talk about various different things that happen to do with footwear and of course with overall foot functionality. And I've been doing this for well over 3 years. But yet I have not done a whole lot. This whole entire year has basically been kind of, well, slow for that part. But anyways, here we got number 43, which relates to milestone challenges. As I mentioned before, the local Super Crazy Spice Extravaganza is in fact a 15-part milestone challenge that I did back in August. But since then, let's just say that regular milestone challenges, which would normally attribute to things like how many views I've had on YouTube, how many subscribers I've had, how many followers I've had on Twitter or Instagram, or how many posts have I put on social media, depending on what account I'm talking about. Accounts like those specifically have different kinds of specifications that would allow me to find a good way to eventually procure a milestone challenge video. And even though I have done some milestone challenges this year, they were necessarily not a whole lot. Aside from the local Super Crazy Spikes Extravaganza, you probably remember from back in April where I did a little thing called 8 Crazy Challenge Nights, which I did 8 challenges in 8 different days. Pretty much. And aside from all that, there have also been a handful of other milestone challenges that I've done throughout this whole year. And since August, I've pretty much been lacking on that kind of stuff. Which, I mean, it's plausible getting to know the fact that I've actually had to do a lot of content work. But then, of course, you really do have a lot of other things to consider. Number 44. Boogie2988 gets harassed. As you know by this point, Boogie2988, who has been regarded as one of the best known creators on YouTube that we currently have by today's standards, had actually gotten a seemingly random encounter from one particular individual whom basically had some pretty messy curly hair, a ginormous beard, and sandals, along with a GoPro on top. And what happened was, a few months ago, was that Boogie's house ended up pretty much getting stalked, in a way. As this one ransom encounter, as it seems, turned into a huge escalation. And Boogie had pretty much no choice but to fire off a shot from a firearm as a way to tell this person to go away and all that. But it turns out that it practically stemmed a huge controversy, because even with that problem taken care of, it does seem that there would be a good likelihood it's still unknown at this point. That's only because the investigation is taking a little longer than it should be, but we certainly can't forget about the fact that Boogie2988 is not the one to blame for this incident. This one person whom had been stalking the poor guy is certainly not only the one to blame for all this, but for a handful of other things as well. But it's still important to note, don't ever follow along a celebrity like that. Don't stalk anybody, don't harass anybody, don't go up to anybody of any sorts unless you want to be like one of those meet and greet sessions where it's all about, well, if you want to tell someone that you're a fan, it's one thing. If you want to tell them that you're their biggest fan, it's a whole other thing. But then when you want to tell them that you are going to fight them or kill them, then that's what's going to set them off. And it's also what's going to escalate a lot of problems that might already be in effect. But you know what's probably worse than this, though? Well, here we go. Number 45, kid behind a camera milks the angry grandpa show. As you probably know, Charles Green, whom at the time died at the age of 67 in December 2017, unfortunately left a pretty big hole to clean up. A void that a lot of people did not see coming. And as devastating as it is to know that probably one of the best senior-based YouTube creators out there, whom of course was known as the Angry Grandpa, apparently left the channel behind for Michael Green, the child of Charles pretty much, to take over and pretty much milk dry, because every week we seem to be getting a community post as well as new videos from this one person. The same guy who also operates a channel called Kid Behind a Camera. Michael is in fact, without a doubt, what's considered a bottom feeder. I myself had a lot of trust in this guy and a lot of different bits of positivity towards this one person. But considering how bad things have gone between everybody in that family out there in the South, it's fair to say that, well, there's just so much that they need to work out on. And I don't know about you, but there probably will be a ton of other problems that might stem from this whole entire event. The fact that AGP had died 4 years ago now, it's one thing, but it's also another thing to note that Kid Behind a Camera apparently has the decency to not leave the channel alone and instead focus on their own work. So, these guys are doing little more than suckering us in completely. And they have little to no regard for the overall legacy of the channel itself and how big the subscriber count had pretty much gained since that day that Charles had died. And now, at this point in time, I'm certainly not willing to go on in any further with this whole entire thing. So, we're just going to go ahead and move on to some other things that I myself have pretty much had to do. Number 46. The point where I had to go ahead and sell prized possessions as a way to make some extra cash to hold on to, especially for what was known as an emergency fund. Because, if you remember, I actually had to make several videos about a lot of this stuff, but it turns out that in order to afford certain things like a brand new camera, my Canon G7X PowerShot Mark III had apparently cost over $700. If I wanted to go ahead and afford that, I would have pretty much had no choice but to sell a lot of stuff. And I mean a lot of stuff. At the same time that I was also trying to work with a good part-time job so I can get my financing in order. Especially to comprehend with the large amounts of inflations and tax counts and gas price increases and all that a lot of people are going to start making a lot of drama about. But this was pretty much one of many things that I pretty much felt sad out there for. The fact I had to get rid of a lot of stuff of mine, including my first good camcorder, like my Sony camcorder, and not to mention other things out there, like various pairs of shoes, my Vibram 5 fingers especially, and who could ever forget that point in time where I've actually had to go as far to completely get rid of my old hard drive because that thing was corrupted as crap. I mean, that thing would have been a whole nother thing to talk about, but that alone I might as well mention right now. In July, August of 2021 especially, about a full month would basically take place for this entire event to unfold. But a 4 terabyte hard drive worth of my work, especially with the majority of Gaming with Kaiju Force Neo content and a lot of other stuff, had apparently gone corrupted and would not work correctly. It turns out though that I would actually be able to get it to work right when plugged into another computer, which was basically at a shop a little while away from this house. And so that's pretty much just the thing in and of itself. That was one of many things that I basically kept on to for a while. And then of course when you got all the other stuff I pretty much had to sell just so I can afford a bunch of other things. It's pretty much still going to this very day, for the record. There's chances that where I could basically sell Nerf blaster lots on eBay, for example, alongside tons of other stuff, because currently what I'm pretty much going to be in the market for, aside from a new car, which I basically talked about for number 38, but basically speaking, for such things out there relating to that, for example, plus a few other things that I'll worry about down the line, like a new pair of shoes and probably a new smartphone, because this one here is not doing so well. I've actually gone on ahead and really tried my hardest to find good stuff that I could basically sell. And most of the time though, it's basically just for either upgrading equipment or even just for going on random shopping sprees, which will have anything to do with a lot of things that I have on my channel or otherwise. So that's just pretty much something that will have to sink in for a while. But then we got numbers 47, 48, and 49, which relate to different series that I've started on YouTube. Hot Wheels Hilarity Under the Spotlight, for example, was one of a few tangents that I had attempted to start, along with a series dedicated to custom-based Hot Wheels creations known as Hot Wheels DIY, that of which became a bit of a failure almost overnight, so I ended up pulling the plug on that one rather quickly. Hot Wheels Hilarity Under the Spotlight, however, would have a bit of a higher end of longevity because it would stick around throughout pretty much a few more months, especially throughout June all the way to around November of 2021, where it would eventually end for good after I would then cut down the amount of episodes for it, plus a few others, because other series that I got here will include films I should have talked about years ago, which I plan on having 99 episodes worth of stuff, and instead it turned out to be 81 episodes, plus some bonus episodes pretty much. And then we got Gaming with Kaiju Force Neo, Facecam Specials Insurgents, The Enlightening Venture, which would basically be a Facecam Specials Insurgents series that would take place between Facecam Specials Insurgents Part 4, which I had earlier in 2021, and then right here now we have Facecam Specials Insurgents Part 5. The Enlightening Venture was supposed to take place throughout the majority of the rest of this year, up until Part 5 would then begin after mainline Season 6 of GWK would end this past November. But then, of course, well, that unfortunately wouldn't work out either. So I ended up cutting down episodes on that one as well. So, as unfortunate as that is, that's just pretty much how that seems to have taken place right there. Number 50, insanity sets in. If it's not obvious enough to you, let me just tell you right off the bat. I am literally feeling like I am going to go insane. Like, how many bad events could take place in 1 year? I don't even know for sure what that could pretty much be like, but at this point I would not be wanting to find out, Because if I did, then I would have to spend the rest of my time in an asylum, for crying out loud. An institution where I would only need professional help because I can no longer control my own emotions. And when you have something that bad happening to you, then you know you're in for a lot of trouble in life. Number 51, financial difficulty. As I've said before, the combination of different things, including price inflations and whatnot, a lot of economic issues that have happened, have pretty much allowed my own financing to eventually become a little disfigured. I've had some pretty decent credit over the past couple of years, but it's not necessarily all the way up at the top. But the thing is that I am in fact doing what I can to get back under control and for it to eventually set in and allow for me to flourish nicely. Number 52, the move to Oregon. On the date of November 12th, 2021, a few days after we had arrived from Carolina, I intended to leave the state of Wisconsin to start a whole new life over in another part of the country, to have a fresh start take place by having a whole new place to live in, a whole new kind of family to get along with, a whole new job, a whole new array of opportunities, and a whole new town to pretty much settle in for good. At least up until the point where I would eventually settle in somewhere else. But the thing is that the move to Beaverland, Oregon, while it might have seemed straightforward, it was a pretty big deal. The fact that I had been suffering for years from a ton of different things. I mean, I've gone through a lot of stuff. I've gone through abuse. I've gone through injustice. I've gone through political issues, especially. Ones that were indefinitely wrong to go with. I just wanted to completely eradicate all that from my life. And the only way I was going to do that was to completely cut ties with everything that I've had from my old life and then eventually move on to a whole new array of opportunities that would eventually lie ahead. And how I did so was I simply bought a ticket that cost me less than $200 for a train ride on the Amtrak Empire Builder from Milwaukee all the way to Oregon. It would take me there, and it would take well over 2 days to happen. By the time I arrived over there, though, I was pretty much forced to get into contact with my older relatives, especially after some random encounters with government officials whom were basically boarding the train left and right, especially throughout several stops that I had taken throughout Montana and Idaho. But that's just the thing about it. The past always comes back to haunt you. And the real thing about it is that even though this was basically a failure at best, I mean, I'm at least grateful to say that I actually got a say out of this. Nowadays, I have myself my own credit line. I have control of a large local business here in Menominee Falls. I literally have a good amount of savings that I can get, along with a lot of financial support from most banks and whatnot, so I could get a good car, for example. And I even have the opportunity, which I will eventually be able to get into a good college here in the state of Wisconsin, as well as an apartment. So you know what? I'd say that this was a horrible thing, but it did have to happen. Because now I have a say in almost everything now. As an adult, I truly needed this kind of stuff. I needed everything that I could possibly get my hands on as an adult here in America. But you know what though? This is the real deal right here when it comes to how bad this particular event was at the time. With number 40, yeah, okay, it's not 40 at all. It's number 53, a falsified missing person report. At the time that I was on the train, the Amtrak Empire Builder, especially when I was cruising into Minnesota and Dakota and Montana, I eventually caught the news that somebody out there had apparently put up some ransom. And it turns out that people all across the state of Wisconsin had put up a falsified missing person report about me. I made it explicitly clear by sending a letter over to my old relatives here in Menominee Falls that I was in fact going to be moving out of the state. But unfortunately, because of a lot of complications with getting things ready to be able to go all to the station in Milwaukee, I had to abandon a lot of plans. I had to pretty much scrap a lot of different project ideas that I had for this state especially. I also had to pretty much ditch out a lot of the plans that I had put out for the day right before I was scheduled to move and all that. But the whole thing about it was that somebody decided to put up a missing person report when in actuality I moved out of the state. And I was hoping to send in a letter to these people about this. And I don't know about you, but guess what else is happening? A literal ransom had turned up after this report was put together. They were able to get a hold of the numbers that they were supposed to contact if they knew anything about my whereabouts. They basically made up a lie, pretty much. They made it seem like I was actually kidnapped when in actuality I was actually moving out of the state and heading into Oregon to live for a while. So, you just cannot argue with a lot of this stuff. I mean, it was bad enough when somebody decided to make crap up about me at the time, but it probably just seems even worse that somebody decides to make up even more stuff about me. So, I guess that's that. We're going to move on from that point though, because now that I have a say in about everything right now, I'm at least grateful that I brought on a lot of change to this whole freaking state. Like, it certainly is not a good thing for anybody to try and leave me out of everything that I need in life. Because now we're going to move on to number 54, the inflation. Obviously. A lot of people are blaming President Biden for being responsible for the huge economic disasters that we got right now, but don't even do that. Don't ever claim that somebody is to blame for any of this, and don't even claim that anybody has done wrong when they actually haven't. President Biden is not Donald Trump, and never will be. A guy with some mentality is a million times better than a guy who's a literal terrorist and commanded an army's worth of Americans to attack our own soil. So suck it. And number 55 basically is going to be about Angry Video Game Nerd Season 15. I really have to tell you that from March 2021 all the way to the 3-part episode, which was about the 200th official episode of Angry Video Game Nerd, it turns out that, well, AVGN Season 15 was huge. But unfortunately, it's probably not for the right reasons. I mean, there's certainly a lack of a multitude of different things there, including the unbelievably big amounts of different insults and the like, and also the I rather things out there. Because it seems that in every single episode, we seem to hear James D. Rolfe create some sort of I'd rather joke as a way to bring up a lot of comedic effect, but also to give us a huge satirical feel as to how bad certain video games are, especially blasts to the past that are obscured for a reason. So, at least compared to seasons 12, 13, and 14, 15 is not quite as good, unfortunately, as it seems, because despite having a 200th episode, which was released in 3 parts, I have only yet to watch it. I've never gotten a chance to watch it since it came out. And that's only because that's kind of what happens when you release in 3 different parts, and also when you pretty much happen to bring up some of the same stuff over and over again. I mean, this whole entire season has had a lot of things in it, including the official review of the Commodore 64 computer from the 80s, And not to mention with a handful of other games that we never quite heard about, because there's a reason why these things were obscured. So, in any case, in its own right, it probably would have been at least a little bit decent, but unfortunately, I don't really see that. Season 14 and definitely Season 13, both of these were actually better. So, yeah, that's really unfortunate. Hopefully Season 16 could help with this and be a little bit better, but only time will tell. Number 56, the hiatus of content creator DeWilstonator. If you don't already know William Grubb Patterson, then well, let me go ahead and point this guy out for you. William Patterson, as the official name of this person implies, was born in 1991, the same year as Sonic the Hedgehog, and the same year as Terminator 2 Judgment Day. And not to mention, it was also the same year that Michael Jackson's Dangerous would be released, or Bruce Hornsby's Set Me in Motion. And a lot of other stuff, pretty much, but that's not really the point here. But anyways, this guy is now 30 years old and had apparently not been around on YouTube for almost a whole year. The last video that had ever been uploaded officially on the channel had to do with a lot of updates and all that good stuff. Plenty of things to come, but the whole thing about it is that we haven't really actually gotten a lot of tabs on what DeWilstonator has actually been up to. So, being that this is one of the very first ever creators I got to know about, alongside several others that I've also gotten the chance to see on YouTube, especially during the earliest known days of that website ever existing. But the point is that William Patterson, aka DeWilstonator, aka Thespio, the My Little Pony character he made, is not necessarily around, and I don't necessarily understand why that is. So if anybody's willing to let me know on why William is not around much anymore, then well, I would like to know at this point. But until then, we're going to move on to number 57. Catalytic converter had been stolen. Specifically, the 2001 Grand Cherokee Laredo 4x4's catalytic converter, because this is apparently one of several vehicles out there that we've had that actually runs on a catalytic converter. And not to mention a boatload of other old school parts, which most new cars do not have. And the whole thing about it is that during a Milwaukee Brewers game, a huge uproar had pretty much stemmed after a catalytic converter from my own Grand Cherokee Laredo 4x4 had apparently been taken from the parking lot by a few people, pretty much. This actually caused probably one of the biggest rages I've ever seen from anybody. I mean, like, it was bad enough that my own car was taken from me, but it was even worse to know that people apparently had the bright idea to go steal one of the parts that was kind of necessary. So, I mean, I don't even know what else is there pretty much to talk about based on that whole thing. But now it's time to talk about number 58, Gaming with Kaiju Force Neo Tangents. You're probably wondering why is that a bad thing for 2021? The answer is simple. Because they were so abundant. Like, ideas left and right that people have requested and I have since taken in. I mean, the GWK work should have been retired, especially when I should have moved out to Oregon and completed it. But because that had kind of been thwarted, I've since been back here pretty much in Wisconsin. And I decided to step out of retirement. But now people's requests, especially about the games and about the tangents that I happen to work on, are absolutely crazy. Like, I don't even know what to say anymore about that. So, at this point in time, it's probably best that I just leave it well enough alone. So, it's time to talk about number 59, overly busy channel work. Yeah. Probably enough said around there as well, just like a handful of others that I've talked about. Other than the fact that I've also had to work on my channel for a boatload of other projects out there, I've had to do a lot of cutting and a lot of terminations from different projects and all that, which is plausible because I'm already a pretty busy person, but when you have to mix in a lot of other things compared to my channel work, it makes things a bit more complicated than necessary. But now here we are, the final ever thing. Number 60. The time where I had nearly asphyxiated to death twice! Yeah. August 23rd, 2021. It was the time period where I had in fact engaged in the local Super Crazy Spice extravaganza, but during the final stretch of the last 3 or 4 days, I had gotten super crazy in terms of spicy foods out there. There was that one time where day 13 of the local Super Crazy Spice extravaganza was basically about a small vial of Moruga scorpion pepper salt. Yeah, a vial of 1 ounce of spicy salt with actual extracts from the Moruga and scorpion peppers. So, I mean, the name itself is already kind of scary because those peppers are some of the hottest in the world to officially exist. But here's the main thing about it. If you've actually watched the local Super Crazy Spice extravaganza, then well, it's important to note that that would have been the end of my life. Seriously. I took the shot of vial worth of salt right there and then had proceeded to try and discard it, but then all of a sudden I had a huge reflex. I was literally coughing my own brains out there. And the salt itself was very sticky. Like, it stuck to my teeth and my gums. The spice literally leached on to every possible spot of my mouth that could have ever taken place. And when I proceeded to spit it out, the vapors and fumes that were coming out from the extreme levels of spice literally got up my nose and even into my eyeballs. I am not joking with you guys. That was a horrible thing to happen. And I'll tell you what, there's a reason why I've had to cut a few times. Because I was literally blinded. I couldn't even see for 90 minutes. And I had to keep my head attached to the sink, otherwise with the extreme amounts of fumes and the like from the spice, I would have not been able to breathe properly. As a result, I could have potentially died from the extreme levels of spice from this product. But I guess the one thing that probably could have been worse is the fact that, well, I do have some trapdoor issues. In my throat, you have, well, there's a little trapdoor in that area that allows for oxygen or food and water to flow in. Mine's a bit faulty, so that really leads to a lot of choking and a lot of, well, problems in terms of it working correctly. I have been able to consult with the doctor about this, so thankfully I will, in fact, know what to do from here on out. But again, within only a couple of hours after my blinding asphyxiation from the Moruga Trinidad scorpion pepper salt, I literally choked on my own freaking saliva. And it was at the time the worst ever thing out there that had ever had anything to do with a faulty trapdoor in my throat. I could have died. Not just from the salt, but also from my own faulty trapdoor. That's 2 times that I could have died from asphyxiation. So, you know what? I don't even know. Just no. That's literally the one thing out there that I probably consider to be the worst moment of my whole life. The fact that I could have died twice in only a few hours, just from asphyxiation, I'm literally like an enemy to myself. And that's surely the one thing out there that could potentially be worse than all the others that I would have ever had to talk about. But you know what now? It's about time that I'd say that I've literally reached the end of this whole entire thing. That is a whopping 60 highlights that you have just heard me talk about in detail for the most part. Although I've pretty much had to leave some of them out because they were pretty obvious why they had to be on this list. But if there were anything else that I probably could have highlighted, then well, how about the 2021 version of Karen's, which I simply call Heidi's? And if you want to know one particular case that's out there, then how about Victoria's Secret, July 2021? Yeah. If you thought that was bad enough, then well, let's also talk about how many times I've gotten sick throughout this whole year. I've had a lot of common cold and influenza cases almost on an annual basis, but this has turned out to be the worst period for all of that. I've literally gotten sick from the common cold back in April, and it was at the time the worst case ever. It literally felt like I had the pandemic's worth of viruses within me. And I probably would have even died from all that. Maybe by asphyxiation at worst. But at this point in time, it's fair to say that now I seem to have ended a bit early on all this. There's still plenty of time to spare. I said I was going to have a testimony that would last at least 2 hours, but it seems like I've ended it a little earlier than I expected. So you know what? We're going to fill the rest of this video up with a little something different. How about a clip of Choo Choo the Yorkie taking a nap? So that's pretty much it, folks. I guess they'll probably cut it for today. Have a happy new year. Hopefully, we will see 2022 be so much better than this year for a boatload of reasons. But also, make sure to comment down below and all that good stuff. And well, you know what? I'm just going to end it here. Make sure that you like, subscribe, comment, follow me on social media, and stay on the Hollywood side. Good riddance, 2021. We will never, ever forget this. Goodbye, everybody. That's it. Choo-choo.